Welcome everyone to this video for students that are studying the Aspects of Comedy course with AQA on Literature Spec B. The purpose of this video is to show you an example essay for Paper 1 Section C, and the two texts that I'll be using for this video is Oscar Wilde's The Importance of Being Earnest and AQA's Comedy Anthology, which comprises of 7 poems from 7 different poets. This is a 50-minute essay task, which also includes planning and any proofing. So it is a short, snappy answer. And of course, with short, snappy answers, you will probably end up wishing you had more time, because there's going to be things that you wished you could have said but just couldn't because of the length of the task. But it's all about what you do say, not what you don't say, that matters. So for A-level, you will have a choice of 2 tasks. You just choose one of them. And they will be overarching kind of comedic genre kind of tasks, because the questions have to cater to 7 or 8 different comedy texts. So that's why they can't be specific about a particular text. For this video, like I said, we're looking at Ernest and the Comedy Anthology. And I always say with students that if you are doing the anthology, then in this task, just talk about 1 or 2 poems. In 50 minutes, you're not going to be able to talk about 5 or 6. So that would be giving you too much to do, and that would just cause more stress. So doing less poems well is better than doing more poems badly, if that makes sense. Use the text selectively. This is a closed book exam, so any quotes are going to have to be memorised, and you need to make sure, of course, that you select the right bits of the text for the question. That's more the case for Ernest because it's a 3-act play, so there's more text for that than the poems. The poems are quite concise apart from Tam O'Shanter. And importantly for A-level, of course, is to always use the texts knowing exactly what the task is. So I always use the phrase lens of the question. So everything you say must be relevant to the question that you get, because the more you go off on a tangent, the more the examiner will not be happy. There's no need to compare text together, so you don't need to worry about trying to synthesize or to compare and contrast, which makes the essay structure relatively simple, which I'll show you in a second. And there's also no need either to write a lengthy introduction or conclusion. Each could be a sentence long. They can be time wasters. Because of the very nature of an introduction, students don't really commit to saying anything substantial in them, and therefore they can just end up being wasted time. And like I said, it's closed book. So in keeping with the what you'll get in the exam paper, I've got here a choice of 2 comedic questions. And you can see that these questions don't actually make any reference to specific texts at all, because they need to apply to about 8 different comedy texts. So that's why they often are about the comedy aspects rather than specific characters. For the purposes of this video, we're going to be doing the top task about power and privilege, and I've done the second task about the women in a different video. So if you want to see the women response, that is another video that I've made. A reminder that on my channel I have made videos for all 7 comedic poems. So if you need to revise these 2 poems, which I'll be referring to in the essay, then they are there, video 25 and video 20. In terms of planning, I always remember my A-level teachers saying to me that you know when you're ready to sit an exam because you can write everything you need on the back of a postage stamp. What that means is the rest of it is committed to long-term memory, so you don't need to write it down. It's in your brain ready to go. So this is my plan. This took me 30 seconds. And the reason I can be very concise in my plan is because I know what I mean. I know the text really well. So the more you know the texts, the less you have to plan, essentially, because the information is there ready to use. So in answer to this power and privilege task, I'm going to be talking about Lady Bracknell in Ernest, when she interrogates Jack in Act 1, and I'm going to be referring to 2 poems, The Flea and Satirical Elegy, to make sure I talk about 2 texts. But 1 poem of those 2 would also be acceptable as well. So let's start with the introduction. The introduction are these first 3 lines, and you can see that it's short, it's concise, and the second paragraph here is all about Ernest. And this is the only paragraph in the whole essay about Ernest as well. So You've got about 20 minutes, 25 minutes on Ernest, and that's it. So you have to make sure you are picking the right bit of the text to use, but really try and go into detail. So they say comedy originates from the depiction of characters that have power and privilege. In Ernest, this can be seen through the way Lady Bracknell interrogates Jack in Act 1 to find out his wealth and status, and in poems, The Satirical Elegy and The Flea, where power can come from the depiction of a persuasive speaker or a powerful figure. In Wilde's Comedy of Manners, which satirises the late Victorian society of 1895 in its quest for respectability, Lady Bracknell is characterised as a typical archetypal comic villain, stemming from her overbearing and antagonistic interest as a mother-in-law to Jack. Mother-in-laws have often been used as figures of ridicule in comedy. In this play, she is labelled a Gorgon in Act 1. Jack proposes to Gwen, and the couple embrace momentarily before Lady Bracknell suddenly enters and breaks the couple apart physically. After telling Gwen to return to the carriage, she then interrogates Jack about his status and levels of wealth to make sure he is suitable enough to marry her daughter. Her opening question, "Do you smoke?" is trivial, seeing as there are more important things a mother could ask, such as Jack's honesty and morality. Instead, smoking seems unimportant and suggests Lady Bracknell is concerned about trivial details. It is also Wilde's way of mocking Victorian society and the importance the elite place on smoking as a sign of respectability. Lady Bracknell then questions Jack about whether he knows everything or nothing, to which he replies nothing, which is unusual and suggests Wilde is reinforcing the fact that these characters aren't particularly wise or profound. After questioning Jack about his income and investments, it materialises that Jack was found in a handbag and does not know who his parents are. As a result, the seriousness of the scene is subverted due to the farcical notion of a character being found in a handbag. As Lady Bracknell is worried that Jack may be the result of a social indiscretion, she rips up the paper she was making notes on, as if to say there is no way she will allow Jack to marry Gwen, thus creating a barrier that stands in the way of Jack's happiness. This proves that comedy is often about presenting those with power and privilege as merely superficial depictions of pretense, snobbery, and arrogance. Rather than allow her daughter to marry someone she wants, Lady Bracknell instead believes that a good marriage is not about love or courtship, but about wealth, outwardly impressions, and which side of the street you live on. This trivialises marriage. So that is what they've said about Ernest, which means that they've now got 2 paragraphs left, one for each poem. So the next paragraph in this essay is about John Donne's The Flea. In The Flea, a common insect is audaciously and opportunistically used by the male speaker to indulge in a theatrical argument where he is trying to persuade his mistress to engage in premarital sex. The speaker is a young intellectual, which is significant because it allows him to show sharpness of mind and tenacity in conducting his argument, as well as being able to quickly adapt to the actions of the mistress. Significantly, the male speaker has the wit to choose a flea in the first place. Not only is it a mundane and trivial insect, suggesting the speaker thinks his bawdy requests are equally as small, it also suggests that the speaker has thought about the flea's ability to suck blood, which he likens to sexual intercourse. For example, when the speaker proclaims "two bloods mingled be," he is not only talking about the flea's capacity to suck blood from multiple people, but also alluding euphemistically to how sex brings about a sense of togetherness and unity. The mixing of the blood is likened to sex in this metaphysical sense. As a result, the flea becomes a metaphorical conceit for the speaker's quest to find sexual unity with the woman, which is reinforced in the second stanza with repetition of marriage, suggesting the flea represents their togetherness in his mind. When the mistress kills the flea at the start of the third stanza, which goes against his desire to keep the flea alive, he quickly adapts and changes his argument, saying that killing the flea hasn't harmed her reputation, so having sex with him wouldn't either. Within the private space of this poem, the speaker invites the mistress to reject any religious damnation from the loss of maidenhead, meaning her virginity. So a simple insect becomes a way for the speaker to present issues to do with religious morality. In summary, the speaker's sex and controller of the audacious argument affords him greatest power and privilege. So his power and privilege comes from his gender and the fact that he has the wit to engage in this argument in the first place. Finally, and that would be okay, if you're now at 50 minutes and you've done 2 paragraphs, one about Ernest and one about a poem, that's fine. You might not even have to write a third paragraph about a second poem. but let's assume you want to and you have time to, which is where a satirical elegy comes in. So in Satirical Elegy by Swift, the speaker attacks the pride and vanity of the first Duke of Marlborough, John Churchill. The poem is written as a Juvenilean satire, which is a bitter and aggressive attack of the Duke's incompetence and greed, and reinforces how satire often focuses on those with wealth and influence, and exposing incompetence from an elite. The iambic tetrameter and consistent use of rhyming couplets creates a non-stop attack full of vitriol and aggression, as the speaker takes issue with the Duke's profit and pride. Accused of being a war profiteer who was kept in luxury while people were killed on the battlefield, the speaker ironically labels the Duke a mighty warrior, when actually the speaker is ridiculing the Duke's comfort. But the speaker goes further. Not only does the speaker suggest the Duke should have died sooner, 'twas time in conscience he should die, because he lived too long, he also says that the Duke is going to endure eternal suffering and damnation in hell. The last loud trump must wake him now. He left behind so much damage, so many widows and orphans, that no one will notice his hearse passing, meaning no one will mourn his loss, rendering the Duke as a burden who does not leave behind any glory or positive legacy. Words such as stink and dirt juxtaposed with the idea that the Duke won medals. The speaker at the end of the poem suggests that the Duke will return to dirt from whence he sprung, meaning he has no more value than dirt. In this poem, the foolishness of the Duke is shown through his incompetence, and Swift is ultimately making the point that a system of preferment does not work and puts the wrong people into power that can cause immense damage. This is at odds with the notion of a meritocracy. By having this view, Swift is also satirizing the literary form of an elegy, which is usually about celebrating the loss of someone held dear. Here, the opposite is true. Rather than memorializing the Duke's strengths, it is a place for Swift to attack the Duke's and elite's flaws and shortcomings, which can have detrimental impacts on innocent people. As a result, this is the conclusion, comedy texts clearly present those with power and privilege. Sometimes these characters are skillful and resourceful, but also flawed and figures of ridicule. And that could be an example of a Paper 1 Section C response using two texts. Okay, so as you can see, the structure is very simple, very blocky. One paragraph about one text, one paragraph, possibly two about the other. There's no need to talk about both texts in one paragraph. And in my view, I think when students do that, it starts to get a bit chaotic. It's far better to use your essay structure and distinct paragraphs for separate texts. Okay, so that is an example of an answer to Paper 1 Section C. So good luck with your studies.